Hello, everybody. Welcome back for a UFC Mexico City recap where we'll discuss all that unfolded under the bright lights at Elevation, where we saw some fighters wilt under the pressure. We saw a number of fighters gasping for air. We saw gas tanks tested early and often. A lot took place in Mexico City. And let's get things kicked off with the main event of the evening, where we saw Brandon Royval outland, outwork, out hustle Brandon Moreno in a bout that went the distance, went all 5 rounds. And what was fascinating to me was you had a Brandon Moreno who took the fight on a full camp. He was supposed to take on Amir Albazi. Brandon Royval takes this bout on short notice, and it looked like Brandon Royval had the better gas tank. To me, that's what it looked like. And I believe Royval is 8 weeks removed from the bout versus Alejandro Pantoja. And what we saw yesterday, in my eyes, is a Brandon Moreno who even the state of Brandon Moreno that we saw yesterday pushed the fight to a split decision in which he was landing the heavier shots. He was getting outlanded dramatically, but he was also struggling in the grappling department. No mat returns. The back taking ability did not happen on the mat. No takedowns. He was the one getting taken down at times. You also saw Brandon Royval pouring it on. The thing that got me early in the fight, something that really bothered me, was watching Brandon Moreno, the way he backed up at the end of the opening rounds. I believe 3 consecutive rounds. You saw Brandon Moreno, the last 10 seconds of the round, horrific optics, backing up and moving laterally against the cage, almost as if he thought he won the first round and then the subsequent rounds as well. But you had Brandon Royval, I give him credit. He was marching Brandon Moreno down. Later the fight went, you saw the shell that Brandon Moreno was utilizing, but he would only get off maybe 1-2 strikes and then fire that leg kick at the end of his combination. But that was nothing compared to what Brandon Royval was bringing to the table. And I got to be honest, I want to say that the wars that Brandon Moreno has been in throughout the course of the past few years, the Figueiredo matchups, the Alexandre Pantoja matchups, they have taken a lot out of Brandon Moreno. And that's what we saw last night. A fighter on a full camp. The sense of urgency was not there in the later rounds. And you saw Saud pushing the Team Fortis corner, pushing Brandon Moreno, pleading with him, and he wasn't getting anywhere. The last minute and a half, he poured it on, but where was that the majority of the fight? He was getting outworked, and the gas tank was not there. So I want to say that depending on the odds, what we have moving forward, that Brandon Moreno may be fade material depending on the matchup here. It was a disturbing sight to see as a Moreno backer, but I understand watching Royval out there. This was his time to come in here and screw up everybody's parlays who had him locked up. And he did that. He did exactly what he said he was going to do. So Ian says that he thinks Moreno is past his prime. He still is going to win fights, but that performance was bad. And I agree wholeheartedly that Brandon Moreno in that matchup that we saw yesterday, that was not the same Moreno that we saw in the Figueiredo fights. It was not the same Moreno. The sense of urgency, the willingness to engage in firefights, that was not there yesterday. So that was a concern. I watched it all unfold just like the rest of you. And congrats to those who are backing Royval. I know it was a split decision, and we've seen a number of split decisions. In fact, 4 of them on yesterday's UFC Mexico card. But in my eyes, that was a very closely fought bout, and it could have gone either way. You saw one judge had it 49-46 Moreno, which I thought that was nuts, to be honest. I thought it was a closer fight than that. And props to Moreno for getting it done. I mean, props to Royval for getting it done there. And it was interesting how they read off the scorecards, both of the fighters with their first name Moreno. You had to really listen in to see what Bruce Buffer was going to announce to the crowd. So let's talk a little bit about the co-main event of the evening, where Cloud says Yair is fade material going forward. He wilts under pressure and has made 0 improvements since the Frankie Edgar fight. Get up game and takedown defense is non-existing. And I agree with you. You watched that bout, the Brian Ortega that we saw yesterday. He was floored. In fact, remember, he rolled his ankle in the lead up to the fight. As he was being announced, he rolled his ankle, and then he was getting eaten alive by Yair Rodriguez in the opening minutes and the first round. For the majority of the round, you saw Yair Rodriguez in complete control. And what happens? He makes one mistake, and everybody knew that was a possibility. You look at the odds for that fight. Ortega was the plus 120 underdog, and Yair Rodriguez came in as a minus 142 betting favorite. And the way that fight unfolded, the tide turned so quickly, and the takedown defense was non-existent there. Yair almost had Brian out of there, and things changed in a heartbeat. And you saw, once the going got tough, the tough got going, and Brian Ortega busted up. His face was a bloody mess, but that wasn't going to deter him, and it didn't last night. Props to him for coming through, for locking up that submission. Props to the Brian Ortega backers out there. It had been 7 years since he had finished an opponent and via submission, and I believe that's what we had take place last night. Beautiful. And the way Yair wilted under the pressure, it was fascinating to watch that unfold. Now, let's talk about the Daniel Zellhuber taking on Francisco Prado matchup. That was a fight that really opened up many eyes in the Mexico City arena. You saw Zellhuber come in and face a marauder in Prado, who was really going for the kill early and often. It was a great fight. Distance management was the name of the game there. The footwork of Daniel Zellhuber was very, very impressive. So I really liked what I saw from Zellhuber in that matchup. Hope everybody's having a wonderful Sunday out there as you march on towards UFC Vegas 87, next weekend's event. So in that matchup, you had Prado, who was attempting to close distance, unsuccessful. He was trying to be a pit bull out there and really get in tight, but he couldn't do it. Those hooks were coming in hot. Let's see. Prado looks and fights exactly like Drew Dober. Interesting. Except, well, you know what? He was throwing kicks, not nearly the level of kicker as Dober, but I see what you're saying. Similar body types, and he really went for it. Now, Zellhuber, where does he move forward from here? Obviously, the arrow's pointed up, and the same can be said for Francisco Prado in a loss. I was very impressed with Francisco Prado. He was bloodied, that eye was swollen shut, and he was still staying in the fight. So impressive from both fighters. Zellhuber was just a bit too much, and I ended up cashing a ticket on Daniel Zellhuber at minus 265 and minus 270. I lost a bet on Brandon Moreno, 2.5 units on Brandon Moreno went down the drain. But it was a closely fought fight, and we spoke about that earlier. That Moreno does not look like the same fighter. That was not the same fighter that we've seen show up in previous matchups, and it may be that the wars have taken too much out of Brandon Moreno. Let's talk Raul Rosas Jr. versus Ricky Turcios. This was the bout that got canceled. And also, I saw Ricky Turcios posted earlier today. Marcel, I believe, shed light on this, that he hadn't signed a bout agreement for this fight to take place next weekend. So that would be 2 weight cuts for both of these fighters. Apparently, Raul Rosas became ill in the lead up to walkouts in front of a frothing crowd, and hopefully that does get rebooked. But there's talk that it's going to be at a catch weight. Maybe it'll be at 145 pounds. We'll see. We'll see what they end up doing in that matchup. But I'm looking forward to seeing how that fight unfolds. Especially, you take out elevation out of the equation, and how does that change things? A lot of folks are concerned that Raul Rosas was going to gas out and that Turcios was going to pour it on in the later rounds. I personally thought Rosas was going to be his physicality was going to be too much for him. So let's see if that fight gets rebooked. Then we have Yasmin Yelgari taking on Sam Hughes. Yelgari was a massive betting favorite in that spot, and she looked the part. She came in as a significant favorite, and she didn't get the finish that a lot of folks were hoping for, myself included. I played the under 2.5 at plus 205, and that ticket didn't have much of a chance of cashing because Sam Hughes and Yelgari were trading, and no one was getting seriously hurt by either strike. And the killer instinct, you saw Yelgari taking a much more cautious approach after being finished last time out. And sometimes that's what happens. You have a fighter who is coming off of being finished, and they come out with a more cautious approach, and they're not willing to take the same type of risks because they know what can happen. You want to talk about a fighter who takes risks? Manny Torres and also Chris Duncan. Both of these fighters went at it right off the bat. You had Manny Torres who got clipped, and he was backpedaling towards the fence. And then you saw the strength and the technique on display, the takedown, the physicality of Manny Torres, and the ability to lock up a rear naked choke on Duncan. And a lot of folks thought that Duncan was going to be the fighter who was going to come out here with the grappling edge. But Manny Torres locks up the submission. It was not a knockout victory. It was a submission victory. And I want to know how the hell that guy cuts to 155 pounds, because he is enormous for the lightweight division. And Chris Duncan made the flight down there and then got blown out of the water. So not sure where either of these fighters go from here. Manny Torres, if you'd like to leave in the comments section, who do you think would be a opportunistic matchup for Manny Torres? Who do you want to see him go tit for tat with, go fireball for fireball with? If their cards line up. I know Michael Johnson's supposed to be taking on Matt Frivola, but oh my gosh, can you imagine Manny Torres and Matt Frivola going at it? That would be something to behold. Then you had Raoni Barcelos, who defeated Christian Quinones. And what took place during this matchup, Barcelos utilized multiple fence grabs, and those went unpunished. No point was taken away. You also saw the knee against a grounded opponent. Oh, sorry, a knee. Yes, the knee to the face. And you saw the replay. It did land. It did land on Christian Quinones' face. And Quinones is like, what's going on here? And Barcelos poured it on, got Quinones out of there after being mollywopped. Barcelos was getting knocked all over the place for the majority of that fight, and it looked like Father Time was going to present himself inside the octagon and take Barcelos out of there, but Raoni would have none of it. So impressive impressive comeback victory for Barcelos. By the way, we'll talk about the judging here in a minute. There was some wild judging that took place on this card. You had this fight, for instance, Jesus Aguilar taking on Mateus Mendonça, and Mendonça came in as the minus 135 betting favorite. He, in my eyes, won multiple rounds there. Jesus Aguilar controlled throughout the entirety of the third round, and Mendonça didn't gas out as many had suggested, including myself. He came out the other side. And it was a tough look to see the judges give him the nod here. I think that folks who are backing Mendonça got lucky in this spot. You talk about some suspect judging. Aguilar, the shorter limbs, they maybe prevented him from landing, and that was some trepidation on his part fighting the longer fighter. He wanted to get in tight. His guillotine attempts, you knew they were going to happen, but they did not. They were not successful, and they ended up putting himself, when you jump guillotine, you put yourself in a horrible situation if you're not able to lock up the submission, and we saw that take place yesterday. So Mateus Mendonça in this spot, where does he go? Where does he go from here? What happens with the future of his abilities and what's going to go down? You have Jesus Aguilar winning that controversial split decision in a bout that Mendonça, I thought he won multiple rounds, like clear as day. But you have to wonder, the Mexican judges were on the sides of Jesus in that matchup. Then you had the wild fight that was Danny Lacerda versus Edgar Chairez, and look how quick Lacerda tapped in that matchup. It was almost as if he didn't want to be there. He got out of there real quick, got caught in a triangle on the bottom, or he walked right into a triangle, basically. It was a horrible look. Chairez, multiple bookings against Danny Lacerda. At least he has put this matchup in the past, and it's done. Only speculation is that 135-pound weight that he came in at. What does that do for him here? He wasn't eligible for any type of bonus. So what happens with Chairez as far as future matchups go at 125 pounds? The guy looked like a skeleton in previous fights when he tried to get in there and compete. Now, let's see. Appreciate your confirmation on Aaron Pico inside the distance. You got it. Man, he made quick work of Henry Corrales, who Corrales took that fight on, I believe, 8 days notice. And between the PFL Bellator champs card and the UFC card, we ended up losing just under 1 unit. But we've got opportunities ahead, and there'll be other spots that we'll look to lock in the future. Now, let's talk Fares Ziam against Claudio Puelles. What was amazing to me is the judges were not rewarding control time. There were a multitude of takedowns from many fighters who ended up losing on the scorecards here. And Fares Ziam was one of those fighters who was caught up in a split decision, and he ended up getting the nod. But man, you look at now their records. Claudio Puelles, who was having some success from a wrestling perspective, did not throw many strikes when he had Ziam on the mat. And down the stretch, you saw Fares Ziam getting the better of Puelles. Puelles had no answer in the last minute and a half. And that's a bad look. You talk about bad optics. We talked about the Moreno matchup and how he was backing up against Royval the last 10 seconds of each round. Well, also, if you're stuck on the bottom and people are raining down ground and pound on you, in the last 10 seconds of the round. That's a pretty bad look also. So you got to wonder where Claudio Puelles goes from here. He's still relatively young, but he hasn't been a very exciting fighter for the UFC. And he is going to try to roll for knee bars. If he can't get him, then he doesn't have many other opportunities to end the fight or to win the fight. So interested to see where he goes. Then we had a fighter who's likely getting his pink slip, Dennis Bondar, taking on Luis Rodriguez. And Rodriguez really put a stamp on it. He stayed in close, was a pressure fighter through and through until he locked up the submission. And Bondar, you could see, he was a much more technical fighter, but he couldn't handle the pressure and pace. And that was a theme throughout this card. There were a bunch of fighters who pushed a hellacious pace and did not give up on themselves. You had Brandon Royval, you had Brian Ortega, and Luis Rodriguez here. Imagine, I'd love to see Fluffy Hernandez fight in Mexico City. Let's get him on a card. I missed the earlier portion of this recap, but did you mention how frustrating it was watching Royval not throw his left hand with any conviction? I couldn't believe it. Was there all day. Yeah, he hurt his foot also during the fight, hurt his knee during the fight. And the one thing about Royval, he doesn't sit down on his punches. He just throws out whatever he can, and the 23% accuracy on strikes speaks volumes. No pun intended. He's a volume striker, but he doesn't throw any weight behind the punches. You don't see him winning many fights by one punch knockout. And also, if he does throw hard, that's leaving himself to overthrowing and being countered. And it happened early, but down the stretch, you saw Moreno started to run out of gas there. Now, we've got some other. Yeah, he's just there to touch you, not to hurt you. This is a fight where folks who are holding Victor Altamirano tickets at plus 240 or around that number, they deserved a victory in that spot against Felipe Dos Santos, who did not do enough to win that fight. Felipe Dos Santos, who came in as a minus 298 betting favorite, did not fight like a minus 300 betting favorite. And Altamirano was landing takedowns, was landing knees to the body. He was ragdolling Dos Santos at times, and Dos Santos didn't have much to offer. Granted, Dos Santos didn't give up on himself in the last maybe 2 minutes of the third round. He had a better look, and perhaps that's what led the judges to rendering a decision in his favor. But in my eyes, Victor Altamirano should have won that fight. That was a disturbing trend of events to watch unfold, especially if you're laying your hard-earned money on a fighter in that case, because he definitely did enough to win that fight. And you mentioned, I saw that too, Altamirano, he was, I believe, 2,100 live before the scorecards were read. So disturbing, just further proof that you don't want to leave the fights in the hands of the judges if you can avoid that. And you talk about the first fight of the night. This was a fight that didn't end up hitting the scorecards. Muhammad Naimov ends up winning the fight via an injury on behalf of Eric Silva. Eric Silva blew out his knee right off the bat in the beginning of the fight. You have to wonder, was that knee compromised prior to the bout beginning? I don't know. I didn't see evidence of the knee crumpling. I have to watch the replay of that again. But Naimov cashes for folks out there who laid a massive amount of juice on him. And he is a fighter also who I believe is going to he's going to get exposed at some point in the near future by a quality opponent. Nathaniel Wood was a fighter who had the ability to win the fight. He was being fouled numerous times, and even Jamie Malarkey was lighting Naimov up throughout the majority of his fight, and he ended up getting caught and finished. So props to Naimov for getting the victory. I don't hold any grudges here against anybody. I'm wishing all fighters success, and I want to see Naimov face legitimate competition here. You see him come in and fight Eric Silva, who's a 36-year-old journeyman, and let's get Naimov some real competition. Let's see what kind of numbers, what kind of betting numbers they give us in the lead up to that fight. So it was an interesting night of fights. The elevation was a major factor. I wish we could have seen the Rosas Jr. fight versus Ricky Tercios. Hopefully they get to squash that soon, and we find out who the winner of that bout is. And then the fights that we talked about earlier, the Barcelos coming back against Quinones, very impressive. Manny Torres, impressive out there. Yasmin Yergeri, very impressive performance. And then the person who stole the show, as far as I'm concerned, Daniel Zellhuber, very impressive on behalf of Zellhuber, who let it all hang out. You saw he's a young kid who has some great striking. He has some solid takedown defense. And if he can work on getting up after he's taken down, I know it didn't happen. He wasn't taken down against Prado, but I could see opponents trying to put Zellhuber on his back. So props to Zellhuber there. And then as far as Ortega goes, he's continuing to take a lot of damage, but he's tough as nails. Showed you that once more. And as far as the main event, just to wrap things up, Moreno may be a shell of his former self, to be honest. There's sometimes you have to see evidence of a fighter falling off. And in the lead up to this fight, the Moreno who took on Alexandre Pantoja would have beaten Brandon Royval. What we saw last night was a fight where Moreno, the fighter with the full camp, had the worst gas tank against a fighter who came in on just a few weeks' notice without a camp, and Royval, volume striker, who's a bit of a spaz out there. No takedowns landed for Moreno. It was a bad look. He looked shot. He looked shop worn. Brandon Moreno did. So you have to wonder what does the future hold for Moreno? Because this was a spot where he was given the opportunity to participate in a main event, and the crowd was pulling for him. He had an opponent who's there to be hit, and an opponent with, I believe, a 40% or so takedown defense, which he wasn't able to get any legitimate takedowns going. And he just sat there and got outstruck, and he was landing the harder strikes, but there wasn't any real meaningful knockdowns, couldn't push the pace, couldn't do anything with the back takes, couldn't get any mat returns. Even when he had the back and he had body lock going up, it wasn't there. So interesting to see where each of these fighters go from here. The one thing also I'll say is Manel Kape. By Manel Kape missing weight last time out, that did himself a major disservice right around the first UFC card of the year. He had a golden opportunity, and oh man, Manel Kape. So looking forward to next weekend's UFC Vegas 87. And we also have UFC 299 coming up, UFC 300, and also folks who are going to be headed to UFC Atlantic City. I'll be in attendance for that one. Looking forward to catching up with everybody at that event. So thanks for tuning in today for this UFC Mexico City recap, where we had a fascinating, exciting night of fights, and looking forward to many more. So cheers to you. Thanks for tuning in, and remember to go get what's yours, my friends.